Hey, it's Mel. I hope you're doing well and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be looking at another reincarnation case. This one involves a boy named Carl Edon who claimed to be a reincarnated German pilot. I've talked about reincarnation on my channel before. I think I have 2 videos on that certain topic, which I will link in the description box down below. There's a lot to cover in this case, so let's get into it. Carl Edon was born on 29th of December 1972 in Middlesbrough, England. His parents were James and Valerie Edon. James worked as a bus driver and the Edon family were all Christians and they attended church. However, they did not believe in reincarnation. Carl was the 3rd child born in the family and his nickname was Jim. Carl was the only child in the family to have blue eyes and reddish-brown hair. In 1974, at the age of 2, Carl began to speak, and he one day said to his parents, quote, "I crashed my plane into a window," end quote. Then, around the age of 3, Carl began telling his parents how he remembers being a German bomber pilot from World War II. Now, obviously, Carl's parents were confused. Every time that Carl would talk about his past life, he would give a Nazi salute with his right arm raised straight. Also, around the age of 3, Carl drew a German eagle and he would also draw planes with swastikas on them. Carl would say things like, quote, "I died before," end quote. Carl even told his parents specific details of how he died. Carl said that he was shot down in his plane after doing a bombing mission over England and he crashed. Carl went on to describe his, quote, "other mum" as being bossy, plump, and she had her hair pulled back in a bun. Carl's parents grew concerned and they wondered where he had gotten this information from. Since the family did not own any war books, own any model planes, or watch anything to do with the war on TV, Carl's case was studied in 1983, and at the age of 6, he drew pictures of the cockpit of a plane with the dials. When his family asked him what these drawings were, Carl would describe them in great detail. Carl said that in the cockpit there was a red foot pedal, which was used to release the bombs. And he also went into detail about the purposes of the different gauges. Carl also told his parents that his name was Robert and his dad's name was Fritz. After hearing about his son's experiences, that's when James began investigating Carl's claims by going to the library. James asked Carl what plane he was flying when he died, and Carl said it was a Messerschmitt, and the plane number was 101 or 104. A Messerschmitt was a type of bomber plane. I hope I am saying that right. By the way, I think that Carl's dad was born after World War II and he himself was never a fan of war films. Carl said that his plane was shot down in 1942. As a young child, Carl was always interested in German planes. There was an incident at home where the Edon family for the first time decided to watch a war documentary on TV. The documentary was about the Holocaust. Carl saw the TV and said that his Air Force base was located near a concentration camp that was featured on the documentary. Carl said that when he was in his plane and he crashed, he lost his right leg. Oddly enough, Carl had a birthmark on his right leg in his groin area. When Carl would walk, he would sometimes do the Nazi goose step with his knees straight. Also, when Carl stood up, he would be standing like a soldier with his back straight and his arms by his side. Carl was obviously very different. However, his odd behaviour led to him getting bullied at school severely, and he stopped talking about his reincarnation at the age of 10 or 11. Carl was always very neat and tidy, and he wanted to live in Germany. One time at a school play, one of the characters was a German and Carl insisted that he be that character. Carl would grow up and meet a woman called Michelle and together they had 2 children. This next part is so horrific. Carl died at the age of 22 in 1995 after being stabbed 13 times by one of his co-workers called Gary Winter, who had a history of violence and was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Gary stabbed Carl at night near railroad tracks in Middlesbrough. Carl bled to death, leaving behind his then fiancée Michelle and his 2 daughters. Strangely enough, Carl told his family that he would die by bleeding to death and he would die before the age of 25. That turned out to be true. Carl pretty much predicted his own death. After Carl's death in 1997, less than half a mile from the railroad tracks where Carl died, two workers who were digging up a pipeline found a German bomber plane from World War II. I am so sorry. I don't even know if you can hear it, but I can hear it clear AF. I don't know what they're doing, if they're just building a fucking black hole. I am so sorry about that noise, guys. Anyway, moving on. The plane had been shot down in 1942 and there were still visible bullet holes on it. 1942 is the same year that Carl said his plane was shot down in his previous life. The plane was carrying a crew of 4 men. The last crew member found was called Heinrich Richter, and Carl claimed that in his previous life his name was Robert. However, it is possible that he made a mistake and mixed up the names. Richter is close to Robert, both names begin with an R. Carl also claimed that when he died he was flying a Messerschmitt plane, but it was actually a WW2 light bomber plane. Heinrich Richter died at the age of 25 and his plane was shot down and he crashed. This next part creeps me out so much. Heinrich bled to death and lost his right leg. Bye. Like, are you kidding me? What are the chances of that? Oh my god, I got the chills when I read that. All members of the Heinrich family are now dead. In 1997, when Heinrich Richter was found, he was wearing a ring with a P engraved on it. Now, Carl did have a brother called Peter who was in the Air Force, but he died before Carl was born. Aside from that, no one knows who the initial P on the ring belongs to. Heinrich Richter was buried in the same cemetery where Carl Edon was buried. Here's another odd detail in the case. On the day of Carl's death in Middlesbrough, England, before he died, he had got on a train from Skinny Grove. Then 40 years earlier, Heinrich Richter had bombed Skinny Grove and then followed the same railway line to Middlesbrough. Despite Carl getting 2 bits of information wrong, Carl and Heinrich Richter definitely had a lot of similarities. Look at them side by side, right? Carl Edon, he predicted his own death, said that he would bleed to death and die before the age of 25. That was true. Then you got Heinrich Richter, who died at the age of 25 and lost his leg and he bled to death in his plane. Not to mention that where Carl Edon died is the same area where the bomber plane was found. And just to make things more creepier, Carl had a birthmark on his right leg. This case is just so bizarre. Stuff like this really interests me. If you like this video, then give it a thumbs up. Let me know what you think about this case in the comment section down below. As always, thanks for watching. Take care. Bye.